Joe Budden gets tired of his co-host playing it safe.
I don't give a if my cast is quiet right now. I don't care. That's the type of pod we on. I'm sorry that we couldn't have fun with that, but that's not common the way y'all are sitting there and
But
y'all
you
continue
asked
to
us
say on a
today,
big
Joe.
podcast.
On the last episode of the Joe Budden podcast, Joe lets us into what he's really thinking when he exposes his co-host for not going the extra mile on a subject, and the most notable one was during the math conversation. He points out how the cast does not want to talk about it and even says, oh, this show is like this. This is the type of show we have now. It is something of note because I feel like this is the beginning, or well, not the beginning. We're knee deep into the Mark Lamont Hill era, and you're starting to notice a difference between the Mark Lamont Hill days, Wednesday, which is prime time, and the non-Mark Lamont Hill days, Saturday, which reeks of amateur hour and people just showing up to work collecting a check. But that wasn't the only time the cast had been called out by Joe. Joe also gets fed up on some topic that you wouldn't think he would get fed up, and that is the Baddies NBA convo. In this topic, they're basically talking about, do baddies exist or do they show up to states like Milwaukee, Detroit, blah, blah, blah. And Joe highlights how the cast isn't really diving deep into the subject and also calling them out for not taking proper care of a telecast or a broadcast like the Joe Budden podcast. Now, that topic seemed pretty innocuous. I don't know why Joe got so mad. Well, actually, I do know why Joe got so mad. It's probably crossover from all the other times the rest of the cast plays it safe and doesn't want to talk about stuff, and that is what you saw there. Now, we have to look at if this is a valid critique by Joe. Is the cast quiet, or is this an invented reason for Joe to be upset? I think mostly true. You can just look at Melissa Ford and how she's largely developed a type of tact where she is a news broadcaster. Like, she's trying to emulate Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer. It's not really translating into her talking freely on every subject. As far as Ice, there's really no need for him to grow. The only reason I think people say he's grown as a podcaster is because he knows how to pick his spots more. He also doesn't jump out on a limb, but that's also hurting him. And Ish, I feel like he is just, I don't know. The last few episodes, it's been a bit rough. He seems a bit dejected. I don't know if he's taking too well to this new Mark Lamont hiring. Not Mark the person, but just the narratives that Joe is trying to lay out. Ish's issue isn't that Mark Lamont is taking over the show. It's that Joe is trying to paint the picture that Mark Lamont is making the show so much better. And if you go back to the old days with the arrival of Flip and Melissa Ford, that's something that Joe Budden did to Ish and Nice back then as well. He used to say stuff like, Flip and Melissa Ford really turned it up. It had hit a ceiling, but then when they came along, it was lit. And that's what he likes to do, because it's probably tough for Ish and Nice when they look at how they helped the show stabilize after the departure of Rory and Mal, for Joe just to turn around and then make it seem like Joe's constantly upgrading as a result of their actions. This is much a tough pill to swallow for Ish and Ice. To be fair to the cast as well, I don't think it's just the co-hosts who do this. Joe has been really safe. The only reason Joe is able to coast by is just because of his theatrics, very similar to Flip, where he doesn't really talk about certain issues. He only leans into the gender war stuff because that allows him to, get controversial. And then the whole show, what they do in order to protect themselves from having to say anything too crazy is they pick on targets which they will have to never interact with. So like, they'll diss Will Smith. They might diss a actor like Sid Sweeney or a singer like Justin Timberlake because they know they're never going to have to interact with them. And I think that's largely made the broadcast feel commercialized. And now it's more akin to radio, Power 105 versus the old days of the show where you thought they might actually talk about certain things. And you see now that the show is just really tough sometimes. Like, it's still very entertaining. It's still a great show. It's still one of the top of the tops. But I largely think the only way the show will change is if there is a competitor, someone like them, not the guest based shows, because truth be told, the guest based shows are in a bad spot themselves. They're largely interviewing the same guest over and over. And I know people are looking out for their relationships, but the podcast now leaves me yearning for an authenticity, which I feel like the JBP no longer really has. I don't think the chemistry between the co-hosts is so strong for them to not give it up. And the only really bright side right now is Mark Lamont, where everybody else is trying to figure out what to do when he's not in the room. Right now, the Saturday pods are really crappy. They've been crappy for a little bit. And it wasn't always the case. Like in the Rory and Maul era, I remember the Saturday pods, they used to be hilarious. I'm talking about not necessarily better than the Wednesday pods, but just a different vibe, a different culture. And right now, what you're seeing is that the Wednesday pod has a culture and the Saturday pod doesn't. So we're going to have to see how Joe revitalizes the Saturday pod. There are a couple things he could do. I don't know what, to be quite honest. I think more meetings about how to talk or engineer certain conversations. I know the community is going to get mad at me. Melissa Ford, I just don't know what she adds. A lot of y'all be like, I'm going at women. I'm not really going at women. I think she's beautiful. I think she's talented. I think she's educated. But when it comes to that pod stuff, she just doesn't have it. But let me know what you think in the comments. Why do you believe Joe got snippy with his cast? It seems to be almost a weekly occurrence. Like, not an episode can go by where this doesn't happen. And it definitely happens a lot when Mark isn't present. And we also see what the Patreon, let's see what it holds, because I think it's going to carry over. And I think you're going to see a big blow up because they were talking about it on Spaces. They were saying there was this episode that they did after the main pod. And somebody got so heated. And I think Flip turned it up so much so that someone asked for them to edit out the video. And that's another thing, another issue with the pod. They're editing out the best parts. This is terrible, y'all. Y'all can't be doing this. If the content is good, nobody should have edit control. Nobody. It has to be something egregious, like where personal information is revealed. And if that isn't the case, then leave it in there. But follow me on Instagram to Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter to Stop TV. Follow me on Patreon to Stop. This is Danny from the Stop. Peace.